Can you reverse hair loss? The short answer is yes. The long answer is a little bit more complicated. Now, when I talk about reversing hair loss, you're likely to think of it in terms of completely reversing dead follicles to alive ones. Unfortunately, there is no way of doing this. Unfortunately, once a follicle dies, it's truly gone. And what I want to talk about for a second is the process of miniaturization. Miniaturization is the process by which hairs undergo gradual weakening. They get smaller and smaller and shorter until they eventually fall out and die. So I want to summarize the hair cycle to you because it is quite complicated, and I'd like to boil it down to its main important components. There's three phases: the Anagen phase, the Catagen phase, and the Telogen phase. The Anagen phase is the phase I want you to focus on. This is the phase that most of the hairs are in at any given point in time, and lasts around about 1,000 days in a healthy follicle. This is the phase that we want our hairs to be in. This is the phase that the hair grows normally and healthily. It grows long, and a healthy hair will grow as long as it can within that 1,000-day time limit. The other two phases I will not go into too much detail about, but these include the Catagen phase and the Telogen phase. The Catagen phase, just briefly, is the phase that involves kind of temporary death of the follicle and lasts around about 2 weeks. We then have the Telogen phase, which follows after the Catagen phase, and that is the resting phase. Here the follicle is essentially dormant. It doesn't grow, and so you'll not see the hair poking through the skin and growing. It is not a recognizable hair as we know it. In the Telogen phase, which lasts around about 100 days, the follicle is somewhat inactive. So as I mentioned, the Anagen phase is the phase I really want you to focus on. So the Anagen phase is the one that is really the most important to know about. The process of miniaturization shortens the Anagen phase. So as I said, a normal healthy hair should grow for around about 1,000 days before falling out. However, with miniaturization, unfortunately, that 1,000 days is shorter. Unfortunately, there is a gradual reduction in the length of the Anagen phase from 1,000 days to say 500 days, 200, and the Anagen phase reduces in duration over repeated hair cycles to the point where it actually doesn't grow at all. And this is when eventually the hair falls out, and we unfortunately experience hair loss at this point. So as I mentioned, we can't completely reverse a dead follicle that has already gone through that miniaturization process. We can't completely reverse that miniaturization process to bring the follicle back from the dead. But what we can do is we can tamper with those different phases. And as I said, the Anagen phase is the most important phase to think about because we use the two FDA-approved medications for male pattern baldness, Finasteride and Minoxidil, to do that. What Finasteride does is it allows the follicle to stay within the Anagen phase for longer. So if the Anagen phase is shortening due to miniaturization, what Finasteride does is it will resist that shortening from happening. And it does this through blocking the action of dihydrotestosterone, which is the main culprit, the main sort of enemy, if you like, for shortening the Anagen phase and causing the miniaturization process and causing hair loss. Minoxidil, on the other hand, I've mentioned in previous videos, it causes vasodilation of the blood vessels to the hair follicle. In doing so, what it actually does is it converts those hair follicles that might be in the Telogen phase, so they might those dormant hair follicles, and it encourages those follicles to actually transition to the Anagen phase. Once again, I'd like to remind you that the Anagen phase is the phase of the hair cycle that we want the follicle to be in, because that is when the hair is healthy and grows normally. And I really want to focus on that word resist, because it really is resisting. It is not stopping. So we still don't stop that miniaturization process from happening. We put up a good fight, and finasteride works well, dutasteride works even better, but we don't stop that miniaturization process for good, unfortunately. So hair loss will continue. It's going to be more difficult with some follicles versus other follicles on the scalp to fight the miniaturization process. That's because some of the follicles are more sensitive to DHT. The ones that are more sensitive to DHT, it'll be harder for us to resist the process of miniaturization because DHT causes miniaturization. Lots of researchers have tried to pinpoint what part of the hair cycle we should aim to inhibit or promote in order to stop the miniaturization process. Of course, with finasteride, we're trying to stop the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone. But this paper, for example, suggests that we should target a number of signaling molecules that are involved in the transition between different phases of the hair cycle in order to stop the miniaturization process. It can get very complicated, and unfortunately, there is a lot of unknown. So what does this mean for you? I would like to mention a protocol that a lot of patients are currently taking and is working for them. We start on some Minoxidil and Finasteride. This is to bring in the cavalry. We want to start to put up a fight and slow down the process of miniaturization. Next thing I would do is I would monitor my progression on these medications. I would look out for side effects and I would assess my hair on a perhaps weekly or monthly basis to see whether there's new hair forming or there's continued loss. All of the medications that I've discussed so far are not permanent solutions to hair loss. The only permanent solution that we currently have available to combat hair loss on the top of the scalp is hair transplant surgery. With cutting edge equipment and cutting edge techniques, hair transplants can achieve excellent results that seem what I like to call unremarkable. The goal of a hair transplant for myself is to achieve a result for the patient that is unremarkable. This is the key word that I'd like to hone in on, because we do not want to draw attention to anything. The goal of the hair transplant is to make a result that is so natural that it doesn't look like one at all. And that's what we've been able to achieve with many, many patients already. And just a reminder, the basis of hair transplant surgery is taking follicles from the back and sides of the head where follicles are resistant to dihydrotestosterone for unknown reasons, of which more research is needed. And we place those on the top of the scalp using one of either FUT or FUE, two different techniques of hair transplant surgery that I've made videos on in the past that you're welcome to check out. Hair transplant surgery really does achieve excellent results. You can see right here that there are many patients that have gone from Norwood 3 all the way up to Norwood 7s, back to their, younger self. Hair transplant surgery really isn't only limited to those who have experienced significant hair loss. If you've experienced just a small amount of hair loss, you can still have a small procedure to fix an area that you might be concerned about, or an area that is worrying you or bothering you. I'm Dr. Parissis from Parissis Medical. I work in London, UK, in partnership with Dr. Feller and Dr. Bloxham in Great Neck, New York. I'd like to thank you very much for listening. I hope you learned a little bit about the hair cycle and that we can actually reverse hair loss, but not permanently unless we perform hair transplant surgery.